To a practical person looking at this notion, well, you've got politics and you've got war, you've got generals and you've got civilian authorities. Surely it can't just be everything thrown into a blender and then, well, who's going to do what? How do you find a clear skein of thread through this whole muddle? Well, the logical thing to do for a practical person would be to say, you know what, let's create a division of responsibilities. Yes, there are political and there are military things, so let's divide it up. Let's have the civilian leaders take care of politics. Let's have the military leaders take care of military matters. And let's have a kind of nice, straightforward sequence in which you have the civilians decide on war, and you have them set the political objective, you have them turn the matters over to the military so that they then accomplish the goals, and then you have the generals turn things back over to the civilians and diplomats at the end to handle the post-war issues. That seems like an appropriate, logical way to go about this. No messy, everyone knows who's doing what, everyone knows when they're doing it and who's responsible. That should work out well. Logical and practical, it may seem on the surface, but in practice, this is the absolute worst way. Well, not the absolute worst, but it's one of the worst ways to do things, and it never works properly. Why? Because the heart of the Clausewitzian challenge is that it's not one thing in sequence followed by another thing. It's that the two things are inherently connected all throughout the operation. There is no such thing in military affairs as a purely military act for a Clausewitzian. And by the same token, everything is political, but your politicians don't necessarily know about military matters. So there's no substitute for a Clausewitzian for combining these things throughout. At one point, he says that to end a war successfully is the highest act of statesmanship. It is it is when the commander-in-chief turns simultaneously into a statesman. And he says this because the grand lines of war continue from war through the settlement into the post-war era. From that perspective, what Americans have generally done is they've focused on one thing first, which is the military aspect, the beating up the enemy, the negative aspect of war, and left the positive construction of some post-war settlement, the resolution of the political issues involved, to some later period after the fact. And what that has ultimately meant is when you approached those political questions at the end of the day, you had lost your leverage and you were also behind events and things had already started to take their course. And instead of, in effect, fighting the war so as to achieve your desired political outcome by treating them sequentially, when you were left dealing with the politics of it, you had no real plan for what to do next.